So today we are starting module 13 of the Discovering Buddhism program. So that means you have, or some of you at least, have already finished studying the first 12 modules. Congratulations. We're getting near to the end. And this module is about Tantra. It's called Introduction to Tantra. So I just want to make it clear, I'm not an expert on this topic. It's very profound, very difficult. I know a little bit about it, and I'm happy to share what I've learned. But please don't expect me to, know everything and fully understand everything. And also, this is an introductory course. We're just going to be looking at some of the general principles of Tantra, not going into the details. Because actually, Tantra traditionally should only be taught to those who have received an initiation or an empowerment. And some of you may have received initiations, some may have not. So it's a topic we have to be a little bit careful about. You can't just openly tell everything about Tantra to anybody. And the reason for that is because some people can misunderstand and misinterpret the teachings of Tantra and then misuse them. Okay, so it was traditionally kept between a teacher and their disciples. So when a teacher, in the old days in Tibet and India, teachers and disciples usually lived quite close to each other and they knew each other very well. So the teacher would know the students very well, and when the teacher felt that a student was ready for these teachings and practices, the teacher would give those teachings. So I think that's how it was traditionally passed down. But nowadays, it's become much more open, and there's a lot of information on the internet. You can go, Google and find all kinds of information in books and so on. So in fact, the Dalai Lama has said that he thinks it's good to disseminate the teachings of Tantra more widely, because there's a lot of misinformation. A lot of the information that you would find on the internet and so on would actually be incorrect. And so instead of keeping the genuine teachings secret and hidden, and then, the mistaken teachings are all over the place. So it's better to open up the door to the general teaching. So anyway, we're just going to be looking at this topic in a general way, and I'll do the best I can to explain it and answer questions that you may have about it. So Tal sent you 2 files. You may either have printed them out or you have them on your laptop or device or whatever you have. Okay, so this one is just an outline. At the top it says Introduction to Tantra, Discovering Buddhism, Module 13. It's a 2-page sort of outline. So these are the topics I'm going to talk about. So I thought it would be useful for you to have this outline, and then I will explain each of the points as we go along. Okay, so first of all, we'll look at the place of Tantra within Buddhism. Where does it fit in? So in the outline, letter A says 2 main divisions of Buddhism. Do you find it? You with me? Mm-hmm. So the first, number 1, is Hinayana. This is a term that is found in Mahayana texts. I don't think people of that tradition use that term themselves, because literally, if you translate it literally, it means the sort of the lower vehicle or the lesser vehicle, which sounds a bit like putting down, kind of derogatory. And in fact, the people who are following this path in the present day use the term Theravada. And this is the type of Buddhism that is found nowadays in Thailand, Sri Lanka, Burma, Cambodia, the southern and Southeast Asian countries. The monks and nuns usually wear yellow or orange robes. That's one way you can tell. And another way that this is translated, another term that's not so derogatory, is individual vehicle, or another term is fundamental vehicle. The Dalai Lama has started using the terminology related to the language that's used. So this tradition of Buddhism mainly uses Pali language, P-A-L-I. It's an ancient language of India, and their scriptures are preserved in that language, and they recite their prayers and so forth in Pali language. So His Holiness has started calling this tradition the Pali tradition. So that's another term that you would come across. And then the second division is Mahayana, which is sometimes translated as universal vehicle, because Maha actually means great, great vehicle, but sometimes translated as universal vehicle. And this is the type of Buddhism that you find in more the northern Asian countries such as China, Japan, Korea, Tibet, Mongolia. Vietnam, it seems, had both traditions, both Hinayana and Mahayana. But the differences between them are not geographical, they're not based on country, they're based on other points. I mean, there's a lot they have in common. They all trace their teachings to the Buddha. They all follow the teachings on the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, so the basic teachings of the Buddha. But the main difference between these two divisions of Buddhism is in terms of what is the goal that you're trying to reach. So for the Hinayana, the first division, the goal that they wish to reach is Nirvana, or it's sometimes called individual liberation. That may be why it's called sometimes the individual vehicle. So what this means is somebody following this tradition wants to free themselves from suffering, all the different kinds of suffering, and the causes of suffering. Okay, so this is what the Buddha taught in the first teaching on the Four Noble Truths. He taught there's suffering, there are causes of suffering, there's a cessation of suffering, the possibility to stop suffering, and there's a path that leads to the end of suffering. So this is the main teaching that people of this tradition follow. So they want to be free of the first two noble truths, suffering and the cause of suffering. They want to achieve the third noble truth, the cessation of suffering. And then they follow the path. That's the fourth noble truth. They follow the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. And they're doing this thinking of themselves, thinking, I want to get myself out of suffering and, its causes. I want to save myself. I want to bring myself to the state of nirvana, liberation, peace, and so on. So they don't have the aim of helping all other sentient beings. That's just not on their agenda. It's not that they don't care about others, because if you follow this path, part of the path is to develop compassion and love and non-harmfulness and, good attitudes, positive attitudes towards others, towards everybody. But you just don't have this idea, I am going to help all of them become free of suffering. That's just not what they are concerned about. Excuse me. Whereas in the Mahayana, that is the goal in the Mahayana. The Mahayana is about wanting to help all living beings. So those who are following the Mahayana, a genuine follower of the Mahayana, is someone who wants to help all living beings. Not just me, this one person, but everybody else, without exception. Whatever other living being there is who's still suffering, I want to help them, I'm going to help them. And the way to do that is to become enlightened, become a Buddha, which is a further development of the mind beyond Nirvana. So it has everything that Nirvana has, but more. There's more abilities, more powers, more compassion, and this dedication to help all living beings. So somebody who's following the Mahayana path is thinking, my goal is to become a Buddha, to become fully enlightened, in order that I will then be able to help all other sentient beings. And that's why it's sometimes called the universal vehicle, because your attitude is universal. You're thinking about everybody, not just yourself. Okay, so that's the main difference between these two schools, and there's some other differences as well in terms of explanation about the path and how you practice and so on. But a lot is common between the two. Okay. Is that clear to everybody? Just brief, basic, yeah. Well, I think the teaching isn't just in Tibetan Buddhism, it's in the sutras. So if you really go deeply into, for example, the sutras used in the Chinese schools, Zen schools and so on, like in the Lotus Sutra, that's an important sutra used in the Zen tradition, it does explain this difference. So maybe it's not, like for contemporary Western audiences, maybe it's not explained so much, but it is there in the sutras. And the reason I'm introducing it here is to just to give a map of Buddhist teachings. And mainly what we're going to focus on is Tantra, and just to show where Tantra fits in to the overall map of Buddhist teachings. And whatever term you use, whether you use Hinayana or you use Theravada or you use Pali tradition or whatever term you want to use, there definitely is a different school or a different tradition that's practiced in certain countries. And I myself haven't studied that much, but I remember once meeting a monk who was originally from France, and he spent 25 years living in Burma and Thailand and so forth, and we were just talking about differences, and he said he had read some of the Mahayana teachings, the Mahayana sutras, and he said he found them just so strange. So, we can't just erase the differences and say there aren't any differences and they don't matter and so on. There are differences, but it just depends on how we look at them and how we deal with them. And the ideal thing is to have respect for all the different schools and different traditions, because they all were taught by the Buddha. And the Buddha is sometimes compared to a doctor who looks at different people and diagnoses their situation, what problems they have, what they need and so forth, and then will give them different medicine, different medical advice, different medical treatment to follow. So that's why the Buddha didn't teach exactly the same thing to everybody, because not everybody was the same. So there are people who are more inclined towards one kind of practice and other people who are more inclined to another kind of practice and so on. So if there was only one way of teaching that the Buddha gave, it would leave out some people. Some people wouldn't be able to relate to that. So it's regarded as a kind of skill that the Buddha did give these different teachings and different practices. So that's the reason for talking about it. But if you don't find it useful or helpful, you can just not pay attention to it. Yeah. I mean, it's not meant to be disparaging. I know it can sound like that. When I first started studying Tibetan Buddhism and I heard about this Hinayana, and I got kind of upset because it sounded like they're putting them down, they're not as good as us. But it shouldn't be like that. That isn't the right attitude to have. One analogy might be, let's say there's somebody who wants to climb to the top of Mount Everest. Okay, that's the highest mountain in the world. It's, I don't know how many meters it is, but 29,000, huh?
Many meters.
Many meters. Very many meters. Okay, so there's some people who have that goal. Yeah, I actually have it written down. 8,800 meters. Okay, so that's the highest point you can get to in the world. Okay, so somebody wants to climb to the top of Mount Everest. But then maybe there's somebody else who feels, no, that's too much for me. I wouldn't be able to do that. But I'd like to go to Everest Base Camp. Okay, and that's itself is pretty high. That's about 5,300 meters. Okay, so just getting to Everest Base Camp is pretty much of an accomplishment. So you have these two people, and they have different goals. Would it be wrong to say that one person is aiming for something higher than the other person?
That's the thing. The Mahayana think it's higher.
Western thought thinks 8,000 is better than 5,000. It's our thought.
Yeah. 8,000 is taller than 5,000.
Mm-hmm. And that's just in terms of geographical, physical height. But in terms of the differences between, the goal of Mahayana is Buddhahood, being a fully enlightened Buddha. And the goal in the Hinayana is Nirvana. And the name of a person who reaches Nirvana is an Arhat. So there is a difference between these two goals. And that's acknowledged in the Theravada tradition as well. So it's not like, wrong to think that way. A Buddha does have more abilities, more qualities to be able to help others. And that's the whole purpose. The whole purpose of becoming a Buddha is not to, feel I'm better than everybody else and look down on everybody else. It's with a compassionate wish to benefit all living beings. And you need to develop these qualities so that you can help other living beings. It's like somebody who wants to become a neurosurgeon. Okay, so to become a neurosurgeon, you really have to study a lot. First you become a doctor, and then you do additional studies on top of that. But then if you have that ability, that means you can operate on people's brains, which an ordinary doctor wouldn't be able to do. Okay, so you could help people with really complex brain injuries and brain diseases and so on. So being a Buddha means you do have extra abilities to be able to help others. And a person who has reached Nirvana, an Arhat, doesn't have those abilities. So you may disagree with that, but that's how it's explained. Yeah.
I know this isn't the topic, so I'm hesitating to go into it any further. But it occurs to me that there may be a danger, sort of, in focusing on the compassion and the empathy and the giving, which is also appealing to Western Christian Jewish thought. And we can relate to it very easily and think that we're making that progress without doing the work that the Theravada is actually focused on. In other words, not doing the personal work that's really the trenches, like it's the hard work, before you get to the compassion, before you get to the giving.
Yeah. that's a possibility. It's possible to jump into Mahayana and think, wow, I'm doing the best thing, and not really be doing the work, and definitely that is a danger. But the teachers always advise us, it isn't just up here in your head, and coming out of your mouth saying, I am Mahayana. You don't really become Mahayana until you have bodhicitta, until you've actually gained that realization of bodhicitta, natural, spontaneous, uncontrived bodhicitta. So before that, it's just words. So definitely, if you really want to follow the Mahayana, you've got to put in a lot of time on the cushion and in worlds. You have to do both. Anyway, so I didn't really want to spend too much time on that topic because, like I said, I was just trying to place Tantra where Tantra fits in, because it's not always understood. So letter B says Mahayana can be further subdivided into two. So there's two divisions of Mahayana. The first is, the Sanskrit term is Paramitayana, which is translated as perfection vehicle. And the perfection here refers to the 6 perfections, which you probably studied in one of the other modules. Which module was that?
One of them.
One of them back there. Okay. Anyway, the 6 perfections. So, and this, another term for this this division is Sutrayana, or sutra vehicle. And then the second division of Mahayana is Vajrayana, or Tantra. So this is important to understand, because sometimes, I've heard this, for example, in Southeast Asia, where I lived for many years, people sometimes talk about 3 vehicles: Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana, as if the Vajrayana or Tantra is out there, like a separate vehicle. And that's not really true. It's part of Mahayana. It's a division of Mahayana. I don't know how important that is, but anyway, it is important in the sense that it's like, it has the same goal as the Mahayana. The goal is becoming a Buddha. So the reason for practicing Tantra, for practicing Vajrayana, should be the wish to become a Buddha, the wish to become fully enlightened in order to help all living beings. So you have to have the motivation of bodhicitta, the aspiration, to help all living beings. You have to have that as your motivation for the practice of Tantra or Vajrayana. So there's actually different terms, synonyms for Vajrayana or Tantra. We'll look at these later. It's down in letter F. So we'll get to that later. But it's actually, sometimes it's called the quick path. Vajrayana or Tantra is called the quick path. The reason for this is because if one is able to practice, it's actually not easy to really practice Tantra. But if you are able to really practice Tantra, then it's possible to reach the goal of enlightenment, Buddhahood, in a faster time than with the sutra, the Sutrayana, the first of the 2 divisions of Mahayana. And this is because of special methods. There's special methods that are found in Vajrayana that are not found in Sutrayana. For example, within the body, there we have kind of like a subtler level of the body, including chakras, channels, energy winds. Okay, so this is a psychic body, a subtle body, and in the Sutrayana there's no mention of those parts of our body and using those parts of our body. But in Vajrayana practice there is, especially in the 4th division of Vajrayana, the highest yoga tantra. So there's methods, there's practices for utilizing this subtle body, the channels, the winds, the chakras, And by utilizing those parts of us, then it's possible to quicken the time, or shorten, I should say, shorten the amount of time it takes for the mind to reach enlightenment. But even though it's called a quick path, that shouldn't be understood to mean easy. Quick doesn't necessarily mean easier. It's like if there's different roads to the top of a mountain, there may be one that's sort of long and winding, and there's another one that just goes straight up. So the one that goes straight up might be faster, but not easier. You might need rock climbing skills and equipment and so forth. So it's actually not easier, it's actually quite difficult. Okay, so then letter C is the 3 principal aspects of the path. And you've probably heard these before, but I wanted to go through them again because it is said that these are essential bases for the practice of Tantra. If we try to do tantric practice, if you can go to initiations or even get books or material from the internet and start doing tantric practices. But if you don't do them on the basis of these 3 principal aspects of the path, then what you're doing isn't really Tantra. It doesn't really become tantric practice. It won't lead to the goal of tantric practice. So I'm just going to go through these just to remind you. It doesn't hurt to hear these again. So this is a sort of synthesis of the Lam Rim, as he was mentioning. The Lam Rim are the stages of the path to enlightenment. And if you go into details, there's many, 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 many stages, many, many steps. But if you synthesize them, you can put them into these three principal aspects of the path. First is called renunciation. Although the term renunciation is a little controversial because for some people it can sound like giving up happiness, giving up pleasure, renouncing. So it can have a little bit unpleasant connotation, like you have to give up ice cream and coffee and chocolate and all the nice things that you like. And you can't enjoy yourself. You can't have fun. So that's not the meaning of renunciation. Actually, what we're renouncing is suffering. Suffering and its causes. That's what is being renounced. Not happiness, but suffering. But still, some translators and writers, instead of using the term renunciation, call it the determination to be free, which is more accurate in a way because this is an attitude that says, I realize the situation I'm in is painful, is unsatisfactory, it's not good, faulty. I want to get out of it. I want to get out of this situation. I want to be free from this situation. And so you have this determination, this commitment to freeing yourself from an unsatisfying situation. And there's 2 levels of this attitude, renunciation. The first, letter A, is called renunciation of this life. And renunciation of this life means, it doesn't mean, we don't want to live anymore and we just want to die, we want to kill ourselves. It doesn't mean that. It means renouncing the attitude that, we could say the materialistic attitude that thinks the purpose of life is just to enjoy myself as much as possible, just to have as much pleasure and acquire as many things and as many experiences as I possibly can. So it's focused on just this life, trying to enjoy ourselves as much as possible, not thinking of anything bigger, not thinking of anything beyond this life. Because as you probably know, the Buddhist view is that this life is not the only life that we have, but it's just one, like a link in a chain, you might say. Before this life, we had many other lives. After this life, we will have many other lives. So this is just one part of a long continuum of lives. So when this life ends, it's not the end of everything, it's the end of our body, it's the end of the person we are, our identity in this life, but some part of us, usually we say it's the mind, the consciousness, goes on, doesn't die, doesn't stop existing, it goes on and it will take another life, it will take rebirth. And what kind of life we have next time around isn't something we get to choose. Like some people have this idea, we get to choose our next life. We choose where we're going to be born and who our parents are going to be and what kind of body we're going to have. We get to choose. So according to Buddhism, it's not like that. It's not a question of choice, it's a question of karma. Well, there's actually different causes and conditions, many different causes and conditions, but the main one is karma, the kind of karma that we have in our mind. And actually we have a lot of karma. We have both good and bad karma. Some of it we created in this life, but also we're still carrying karma from our past lives. So we still have all this karmic baggage from previous lives that we're carrying. So one of those karmic seeds is going to pop up at the time of death and then be the cause for the next life, the next rebirth. And I think naturally we don't want to be in a bad place. We don't want to, have horrible experiences. We want to have nice experiences. We want to be born in a good situation, especially if you're interested in the spiritual path. So if you have this wish to achieve nirvana or enlightenment, you want to be in a place where you can continue doing that. You can continue working for your goals, not go backwards. You want to keep going forward towards these goals that we wish to achieve. So we want to have the right situation for that. And so we need to make effort to create the right causes and avoid creating the causes that would send us backwards or to a worse situation. So it's in our hands. It's up to us to create the right causes and conditions to make sure that next life will be a good one and that we'll be able to continue following our spiritual path. And so that's the mentality of somebody who's following the spiritual path. So they think that's the main thing to do with my life. That's the most important thing, is to live my life in such a way that I will have a good situation in my next life. That doesn't mean you give up everything. I mean, some people choose to do that, of course. Some people decide to become monks and nuns, for example. Or even if you don't become a monk and nun, there's still people who are just so dedicated to following a spiritual path that that's their number one priority in life, and everything else comes second. But many people aren't able to do that. They have family, they have, bills to pay, mortgage to pay, and so on. So most people, even if you want to, follow a spiritual path, you do have these other things you need to take care of. So you need to work, you need to make money, you need to take care of your family and make sure your kids get to school and so on. But still, you can find some time for spiritual practice, some time to include spiritual practice in your life. But anyway, the point of renunciation of this life means we renounce the attitude, the state of mind that thinks that the whole purpose of life is just pleasure, enjoyment, success, fame, wealth, that kind of thing, a materialistic, hedonistic, you might say, way of living our life, and try to find at least some time in our life, in our daily life if possible, to engage in Dharma practice, spiritual practice. So in the Lamrim, one would meditate on certain topics to bring about this state of mind. One would meditate on the preciousness of our human life, realizing that the life we have is rare and precious, and we should really use it for Dharma practice. Then we think about death, how death is definitely going to happen. We don't know when it's going to happen, but we should make sure we're ready for it when it does happen. Then we think about the different possibilities for what happens after death. Different places we could be reborn, and realize that, we want to make sure we avoid an unfortunate situation and have a good one instead. Then for someone following the Buddhist path, one would take refuge, seeing that we need help from the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. And the most important aspect of this practice is karma, living one's life in accordance with karma. Understanding that the actions that we do will bring results, consequences in the future. So if we want good results, good experiences, we need to make sure we create the right causes and avoid creating the things that would bring suffering and problems in the future. So that's just briefly what's involved in developing this attitude of renouncing this life, or renunciation of this life. It could also be called the determination to be free from suffering in our future lives. Does that make sense? It's like we realize the need to live our lives in such a way that we're not creating the causes for suffering in the future, and instead we're creating the causes for happiness, good experiences in the future. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Any questions? Did you have a question? Or you're just stretching? Oh, okay. Okay. Then the other type of renunciation, letter B, renunciation of samsara. So do you all know the meaning of samsara? The term samsara? Anyone not familiar with that? It's a situation of suffering. It's not a physical or geographical situation, it's more a psychological situation. It's a situation in which our mind and our body, our whole 5 aggregates, are not free from karma and disturbing emotions or delusions, klesha. So, according to Buddhism, our body and our mind, and also everyone and everything in the world around us and the world itself. Where did all these things come from? They were not created by a divine, pure, perfect creator, but instead they were created by karma and delusions. The source of our bodies, our minds, and everything around us is something impure, something faulty. Delusions, ignorance, greed, hatred, and other delusions, and karma, actions that are done, motivated by these delusions. So these are like faulty causes. So since the causes are faulty, the results, our body, our mind, all the things in the world around us, these are also faulty. That's why we have all the problems in life, pain, sickness, old age, death, depression, all the mental suffering, disappointment, not getting what we want, meeting with undesired situations, and so on. And then all the bigger problems, war, poverty, violence, abuse, and so on and so forth, injustice. So all the individual problems each one of us experiences, and the global problems that we experience collectively. All of these are due to karma and delusions. So this situation is called samsara. It's considered very imperfect, very unsatisfactory. Even though, yeah, we have good experiences, we can eat delicious food and drink delicious drinks and listen to beautiful music and watch wonderful movies and read wonderful books and walk on the seashore and, there's all kinds of beautiful experiences. But even those are not fully satisfying. For one thing, they don't last. They're short term. They last just short amount of time, but not long term. And also, if we really look carefully at those experiences, we'll probably find they're not fully satisfying. So even if you're on a vacation with your family in a really wonderful place, a beautiful, fantastic place, if you really look carefully at your experiences moment by moment by moment, you'll probably see that, there's moments when you don't feel so good. You've got aches and pains in your body, you feel annoyed, you feel irritated, you feel bored, and so on and so forth. So there's no perfect pleasure, no perfect experience in samsara.
I just want to ask something quickly. Why death and old age is caused by delusion? Isn't it like a fact? You mention it as part of samsara.
Yeah. I mean, death is a fact because the kind of body that we have doesn't last forever. It's 100 years at the most, or maybe 110, 120, but then finished. And that's because of delusions and karma. A being like a Buddha, Buddha doesn't die.
But he did die.
Well, there's another story about that. Tibetans would say, well, he showed the aspect of dying, but the real, I think I'll explain this later, the 4 bodies of a Buddha, the real body of a Buddha doesn't die. So a Buddha is beyond death. An arhat also. Arhats reach a state. I mean, if an arhat, that's a person who's reached nirvana, if somebody becomes an arhat in this lifetime, then this life will come to an end. This body will die. But from that time on, once they've attained the state of an arhat, they don't have to die anymore. So death is one of the sufferings, sufferings of samsara. So sometimes they call nirvana the deathless state. Beyond death, beyond having to die and take rebirth. But then, for example, a bodhisattva, someone who's following the path to enlightenment, would choose to come back into the world in order to help the beings here. And that means they would go through birth and death and so on and so forth, but without suffering. They wouldn't have to suffer. They wouldn't experience the usual sufferings that people have over death, because their whole motivation for coming into this world, being in this world, is compassion, is to be able to help others. So they're focused on helping others and then not so concerned about what happens to them. And because their minds are much more pure, so they don't experience suffering, death. Does that make sense?
So the difference between the first one and the second one, and the second is that in the first one we are dealing with this life and the karma and the causes and effects, and the second is that the change that we make will enable us to be free from samsara for also next lives.
Yeah, in the Lam Rim, I don't know if you've had a chance to learn the whole Lam Rim, but the Lam Rim is divided into 3 sections called the 3 scopes. And the first one is called sometimes it's called the small scope or the initial scope. That's kind of the foundational practice. So that's where you think about precious human life, death and impermanence, the need to practice karma to make sure that when our next life comes, it'll be a good one, not a bad one. Okay, so renunciation, the first type of renunciation, letter A, renunciation of this life, is related to the initial scope. And then when you move on to the middle scope of the Lam Rim, there your vision expands. You realize, well, even if I have a good rebirth in my next life, even if I come back again in the human world or even in the Deva realms, I'm still in samsara and it's still suffering. I'm not free of suffering. There's still problems, there's still unsatisfactory things. So you realize the need to renounce the whole of samsara, not just, bad situations in our next life, but the whole of samsara. So the second type of renunciation, letter B, is related to the middle scope of the long run. Does that make sense?
So can you say it again? I mean, what is exactly the renunciation of samsara?
Renunciation of samsara means recognizing that as long as we are in samsara, and the meaning of samsara, again, is not physical or geographical. It's more the situation. Yeah, it's more not just mind but body as well. Our mind and body are under the control of karma and delusions, not free from karma and delusions. So that's the real meaning of samsara. The real meaning of samsara is when you have a body and mind or a set of aggregates that are controlled by, not free from, karma and delusions. Karma and delusions are the main causes of samsara. So what you really want to be free of is karma and delusions. You want to get rid of karma and delusions altogether, and you want to not have to take birth anymore in samsara due to karma and delusions. I like to think of samsara as like a prison, being in a prison. Yeah. So I think if any of us found ourselves in a prison, we'd be pretty unhappy. We like freedom, right? We like to be able to go where we want and do what we want. If we got locked up in a prison and couldn't go out and do what we want, we'd be pretty unhappy. Everybody would be. Animals, they're unhappy when they put in a cage. So nobody likes that kind of situation. So being in samsara is a bit like that, but instead of a physical prison, the walls of our prison are the karma and delusions which are in our mind. Our mind is not free of karma and not free of delusions. These keep us imprisoned. These keep us stuck in samsara.
This is Nirvana in a way? When we are free of samsara,
Yeah.
this is Nirvana.
The alternative is nirvana. So if you get out of the prison, you're out in the world, that's nirvana. Yeah. So, so what we really want to renounce, what we really want to free ourselves from are these factors within our mind of karma and delusions. And the main delusion is ignorance. Ignorance, not understanding the true nature of everything. Emptiness.
Actually, all of it it's in Guru Yoga. Every part of it, right?
Guru Yoga?
Yeah.
Which Guru Yoga?
The practice Guru Yoga.
There's lots of different practices of Guru Yoga. You mean the sixth session?
The sixth
Yeah,
session,
yeah. Yeah, because we need to remind ourselves of these again and again as the basis for our practice of Tantra. So if you don't have these well established in your mind and you're just doing some tantric practices, tantric sadhanas, mantras and so on and so forth, it doesn't really become tantric practice. So let's take a break. About 15 minutes, is that okay? And then we'll carry on afterwards.